Welcome to On My Way to Wealth, the podcast where busy Gen Xers can learn financial tips as they navigate life on their way to wealth. And now, please join your host, Luis Rosa.
This episode is brought to you by Latin Excellence. Visit latinexcellence.com. That's Latinx, CELLENCE.com or latinxmovement.com to learn more and shop our merchandise. You are excellence. Hello and welcome to another episode of On My Way to Wealth. My name is Luis and I'm your host. Thank you all for tuning in. Today I want to talk to you about several different ways to build generational wealth. Generational wealth is near and dear to my heart. It basically is the transfer of assets from one generation to the next. Now, why is that important? It is important because by doing a certain amount of things, you can set up a legacy so that generations in your family to come can be already getting a head start in life as they're younger. And I'm going to tell you how that can have an impact by telling you a story. When I came to the United States, I was 11. That was a long time ago, back in 1991. My parents had came here before. My father came in 1987 by himself ahead of time. And then 4 years later, he was able to have my mom come over. And then I'm the youngest of 6 siblings. So we came in pairs. One of my brother and one of my sisters came after my mother, and then myself and one of my sisters came after that. And the older 2 sisters stayed in the Dominican Republic because they were already over 18. So unfortunately, they were not able to come with my parents. They had to get their own process and all that. And it was like years later until they were able to come. But let me tell you this quick story. When my father came in 1987, he was in the US, he was working factory jobs and all that, renting a room out of somebody else's apartment in Washington Heights in New York City. Now, fast forward 4 years later, my mother comes along. Finally, he's still renting that room. He doesn't have enough money for an apartment yet. Now, guess what? Back in 1991, my father gets mugged and beaten up in New York City on the subway. It was a Friday. He had just came home from Queens from the factory job that he had. And he was just buying his subway tokens to have him ready for Monday. And yeah, I guess these guys saw him, that he had money or whatever. Maybe they noticed he had money when he reached to pay for the tokens. And before he exited the subway, they beat him up. They actually were wearing brass knuckles. So they broke his jaw and just left him there. And somebody found him, called 911 and all that. And luckily, he survived that. Now, he was beaten up so bad that my mother was only able to recognize him by the hair, his hair, because from the chest up, he was so swollen and purple that he just didn't look like himself. Now, why am I telling you all this when we're talking about generational wealth? I started thinking about this because, I've written some articles. I've been part of some seminars and things like that. And I started thinking about my past. And I said, what would have happened if my father would have passed away back in 1991 as a result of that mugging and beating? And I was like, just blown away by thinking about it, because I was like, we were extremely lucky that he survived this and that, thank God, he's still alive today. And I was thinking about what would have been the impact had my father passed away. My mother just got here. She probably had a month in the United States. He still didn't have enough money to pay for an apartment. And all 6 children were still back in the Dominican Republic. I would imagine because my parents didn't have enough money, there was no life insurance. There wasn't anything, right? He didn't even have a 401k, nothing. I mean, it was just working to put food on the table and gather enough money to eventually get a 1-bedroom apartment where 10 to 12 of us lived at a time. So I thought about it. What would have happened if my father had passed? And the truth is, I would imagine that my mother would have been here by herself. We would have had to, bury my father back in the Dominican Republic, very likely. And I would think that my mother would have then likely stayed in the United States because she could make more money in the United States, even if it was just a job that, didn't require like college degree or anything, could still make more money technically than what she was making in the Dominican Republic. And she would have had to then stay here in the US by herself as she then worked hard and had my older sisters take care of us younger children. And she just sent money back to the Dominican Republic. And I would imagine at some point it would have been able to come and eventually be all together and stuff. But that would have been quite the setback. It would have been terrible. Obviously, the emotional pain of losing my dad would have been just something I can't even think of. But imagine also the economic impact, how long that would have set us back. And the reason I tell you this story is because, let's say something as simple as my father having had a life insurance policy would have been a completely different outcome had he died, right? Because then there would have been enough money for my mom to still be able to bring us over to the United States, get the apartment she needed, and for us to be on good solid ground financially, to continue on our journey, to work hard, get educated. And eventually, all of us, we all graduated college and all have our own careers. And I'm very thankful for that every single day. And the reason I tell you this is because one of the ways that you can ensure that you have generational wealth is by having proper life insurance coverage. One of the things that you should be considering is, do I need life insurance? Normally, if somebody else depends on your income or will be affected by you not being around, then the answer should be yes. If you're in a marriage or you have children that depend on you or anybody that depends on you financially, think about it. If you do not have a life insurance policy, you should really consider getting a basic life insurance policy to at least cover for a certain amount of years, even if it's just the most basic type of insurance. A lot of us feel kind of weird talking about life insurance because then that means you have to think about death. And I understand that. But, you're not going to jinx yourself just by buying life insurance, because think about it. You already have car insurance probably, right? Doesn't mean you're getting into an accident every week, right? But you have it. The only reason we get it is because it's mandatory, right? Life insurance isn't mandatory, but it's something you should consider. So I want you to think the same way I did. Think about when you were younger and think about what would have happened if one of your parents had passed and did not have life insurance. How would your life have changed? Would you have had to move in with like a relative? Would you have to go to work and not finish school? Like, what do you think would have been the impact to your life? Think about it that way, because the reason I say that is because it might drive the point home if you think about how it would have impacted you had it happened. And then now think about the reverse of that coin is, who depends on my income today? Even if you're in a marriage and one of you doesn't work, it doesn't mean that the person that doesn't work shouldn't be insured. Because I've worked with plenty of couples where, let's say husband and wife, and the wife is home with the kids and not working. We still get life insurance policies on the wife, because if she were to pass, there's still was going to be a void there. The person that remains working might still need to have money to pay for the childcare, or maybe money to have set aside for college, whatever it might be. Right. So it's something for you to consider. Think about how it would have impacted you growing up if one of your parents had passed and did not have life insurance. And then think about how would it impact loved ones today if you pass without having life insurance. It could be a game changer, and it doesn't have to be a fancy product. It doesn't have to be anything super expensive. One of the things that you can talk to a financial planner about is to see if you, in fact, do need insurance. And if you do, how much and what type of policy might best serve you based on your goals and your current situation. But it's something that I really want you to consider, because oftentimes when we're talking about generational wealth, some people don't necessarily realize that they're thinking more about accumulating assets that could then be transferred to people. And obviously that's a major part of it, but there's also the things that we don't necessarily own right now, but you have to protect that income source, and which could be provided for with proper life insurance coverage. The second thing would be education. It's a great way to build generational wealth. There's twofold to that. One is, imagine saving enough money, if you have kids that are young enough, where you would leave your kids enough money when they go to college to already have enough to pay for 4 years of school. Imagine what a gift that would be. Think about it yourself. I mean, I know people that are in their 60s who are still paying student loans right now. Imagine just giving that gift to your kids. Hey, congratulations, you graduated. You owe zero in student loans because we saved enough while you were young to be able to pay for the school. And you can use things like a 529 plan to save for these, which are tax advantageous if you use them for school. I have some podcast episodes talking about those as well. But just imagine you, like if you have student loans right now, just picture how different would your life be today if those student loans would go away, if you just graduated from the beginning with zero debt. Just picture that. I've spoken to some people before that they're like, oh, I don't want to leave my kids rich. And I'm like, it's not about leaving your kids rich, but give them enough of a head start. If you at least give them that gift of a debt-free education, I mean, that can have such an impact later on in their lives because immediately, imagine just like a 21, 22-year-old graduating with zero debt and immediately getting the job, and they have no student debt, no credit card debt. And from there on out, it's just saving money, investing, and setting themselves up for a better financial future. The second part of that is education directly talking about money. I had my fellow colleague and friend, Matt Gardner, on in one of my episodes talking about how to talk to your kids about financial literacy. We call it financial because it should be fun. He has a game that he's developed, the 4 Money Bears, and a book that he wrote. So check out that episode as well. Amazing work so that you can talk to your kids about money. It's so important because a lot of people think of money as taboo, but in reality, you can have open conversations about money with your kids from an early age so that by the time they're adults, they have a really good understanding of it. So let me give you an example. One of the things that you can do is adding your kids as an authorized user to your credit cards. Think about it this way. Imagine your child is, 16 years old, they're about to go to college in a few years and you add them as an authorized user, even at 18, right? On your card that you've had for 15 years, a really good established credit history, they're going to benefit from that as well. Because as an authorized user of your existing account, they too will benefit from your history and start building that credit. Now, can you make them an authorized user and not give them the card so that they actually don't have authority to use your account? Sure. But I would recommend you take it a step further and actually take the time to educate them about credit. Let them make mistakes. Give them access to your card and see how they handle it, right? Because it's better to do it under your supervision than eventually just getting their own credit cards and making tons of mistakes. When I was growing up, my parents now in their elder age have credit cards because we told them how credit cards work and we're able to get it for them for convenience purposes so that they can pay some things that before they were paying in person, like at a check cashing place or something, But growing up in the United States, they didn't know about credit cards. They didn't have any sense of knowledge of the U.S. financial system other than maybe at best they had a savings account, and that's it. So I was able to get credit cards in college because the applications were included in the books at the library when I bought them, and I still have those very same credit cards over 20 years later, which has done phenomenal for my credit score. But at the beginning, I misused those credit cards like crazy. I mean, I'm telling you, I had a credit card before I had a job because they were just approving them. Me with no credit history and no job, but somehow the application was still in the book and I got a credit card back in 1997 as a college freshman. To me, it was like so exciting to have access to this money, right? So as you could imagine, I certainly misused it. Same thing with the funds that I took out for student loans. I was fortunate enough to go to a SUNY system school, which is State University of New York. So it was a state public college. And I also became a resident assistant, which paid for my room and board. So I didn't have a huge student loan burden when I graduated, but I still had student loans. And guess what? I over borrowed on my student loans because I had no idea how it worked, just didn't know. And I remember getting checks back because the student loans that I was getting were more than was needed to cover the school, and I would get a check back. I had no idea. To me, it was more money, right? So between that and the credit card, as you can imagine, I got myself into debt at a very young age. I used some of those funds to go to Cancun, Mexico during spring break, just because I didn't know any better, So I already started off on the wrong foot, graduating college already with credit card debt and student loan debt. It's not a good look, right? It took me a few years to actually climb out of that hole. So as a result of that, I've had to work even harder at making sure that I have enough money saved up for later on for my retirement and stuff. I had to save that much more because I wasted a lot of time in trial and error. And you can give your kids the gift of education, not only paying for their college if you can, or a portion of it, but also educating them about money, about credit, so that when it's their turn to start at life, they already have a head start and they don't make mistakes on their own. They already learned from you. We're not going to live long enough to learn from everybody else's mistakes. So I'm fortunate enough to have been able to learn all this on my own, but the people that can learn from other people's mistakes are even more fortunate. So that's another gift you can give your kids. Think about bigger picture, right? Just having the next generation with a solid financial standing so that they can build for themselves and then their generation to come. Number 3 is investing. A lot of people are terrified of putting money in the stock market. And I understand their concern, especially lately, right? When you see the market dropping, you saw it during the pandemic. A lot of people prior to the pandemic had not experienced true market corrections. They've been investing for a little bit and it's done nothing but go up in general, right? So when they experienced the pandemic, they were like, whoa, this is a lot, right? So a lot of people are terrified of investing, but think about it, and I've mentioned this in other episodes, it's like, you need to have a certain amount of money set aside for your emergency savings and any short-term goals. But other than that, especially if you're younger and you're saving for retirement, you want to make sure that the money that you have is going to grow and outpace the cost of living, AKA inflation, right? So especially now you see inflation in the news, you want to make sure that the money that you have is actually making enough to keep up with the rise of the cost of things and also keep up with taxation. Because the money that you make, even if you have money in the bank account, any interest that you earn on that savings account, as little as it may be, that's also taxable. So that's adding insult to injury, right? So you want to make sure that you invest. So long-term goals, again, very important you speak to a financial planner so that you can develop the proper portfolio for you. And there's plenty of different ways to invest. The stock market is just one avenue. Some people prefer real estate. You can do very well as well investing in real estate if that's what, that's a passion for you, or you can have a mixture of things. Some people invest in themselves and go out and create their own businesses, even if it's a side hustle at the beginning, and eventually that may flourish into something else. So there's plenty of ways to invest, but ultimately you don't want to have just all of your money always just sitting in the bank to feel secure. So you got to step out of the comfort zone if you want to create some meaningful generational wealth. Number 4, save for your own retirement. As of now that I know of, aside from a reverse mortgage, there really isn't any loans out there that you can use to finance your life in retirement, right? If you want to buy a car, there are car loans available. If you want to go to school, there are student loans available, right? If you want to buy a house, there are mortgages available. But there's no retirement loan. There's nowhere where it's going to lend you some money so that you can live from retirement to death, right? So the burden is on you. And that's why you got to take advantage of certain situations. Like if you have an employer 401k and they offer a match, you want to make sure that at the very minimum, if you can't do anything else, at the very minimum, start investing in your 401k up to the amount of the match, because otherwise you're leaving all that free money on the table. The money that your employer is providing you as part of a matching contribution. You want to make sure you take advantage of that. Also take advantage of the tax code. So very important for you to work with a financial planner or a CPA or an enrolled agent that can help you take advantage of the tax code. There's so many things that you can do throughout the year to invest in a tax savvy way, do things that, like, for example, invest in pre-tax, like a 401k or an IRA, or maybe it might make more sense for you to do a Roth IRA because you're going to pay less taxes later. So it varies by your situation, but ultimately you want to use the tax code to your advantage as well, because there are ways where you can legally save money on taxes and save in a tax advantageous way. Because remember, inflation and taxation are going to be eating away at your money. Also, estate planning. A lot of people, this is one of my first episodes. I think it was like episode number 3. I talked about estate planning. I had one of my colleagues, Matthew Winters, come on. He's a estate planning attorney. And we're talking about estate planning. A lot of people, when they hear that word, and even me at the very beginning, before I was a financial planner, every time I heard the word estate planning, to me, this was like, oh, that's for rich people because they have an estate. Guess what? You have an estate too. We all have estates. So you want to make sure you protect it. It's the things that you have. Not all of it is money. So let me give you an example. One of the things I highly encourage my clients to do is to have healthcare proxies, for example. I've done this with my wife, powers of attorney. So like in case I get incapacitated, she has the power of attorney where she can act on my behalf. She already knows what I would like in terms of healthcare, and she can act as my healthcare proxy. And this is very simple, like simple documents that you can get set up even online. You don't need to hire an attorney and spend thousands of dollars for this. These are a lot of times included in an overall estate planning package. But at the very least, you want to have your healthcare proxies, powers of attorney. Also, very important is access to all of your accounts, online stuff. This is something I did with my wife as well. We use one of those password sharing apps. So if something did happen to me, she knows exactly where to go. She has access to my social media, to my bank accounts. I mean, that's all part of your estate, right? You have digital assets as well, like your social media. Another thing when it comes to estate planning is if you have children and they're minors, and a lot of couples travel together, right? That's common. They go on anniversaries, some trips. What would happen if the two of you passed? Who do you want to be the legal guardian to your kids? Do you want a court to determine that? Or would you rather put that on paper ahead of time? All right? These are the kinds of things that you can put as part of an estate planning package. A will. How many rich people you see out there, entertainers, actors, singers, you see all the time, these people that leave like huge estates and die with no will. The mess that they leave. Your family is already destroyed because of your loss. Now they got to worry about going to court and trying to figure out who gets what. And also, it's a public matter because it goes through probate, basically, which is a public process. So people are going to know everything. And number 2, it's a lot harder and more expensive to go to probate because you have to hire attorneys and go to court and all kinds of stuff. Whereas if you already had created a trust and will and all that stuff and left everything how you wanted it, they will skip probate. So it'll be a private matter and it'll be cheaper to handle. So these are the kinds of things. So even if you don't have a large estate, quote unquote, you still do have an estate. And this is something that you want to take care of because all these things combined are going to really make sure that you are putting yourself in the best possible financial standing for yourself today, but also setting yourself up to create that legacy and make sure that the next generation is set up. Right now, the boomers, I was reading a report from Bloomberg from last year in October. They have about $59.6 trillion in wealth. That's the largest of all of the generations. Generation X has 28.5 trillion, more or less. And that's 10 more times than millennials. But doesn't mean that millennials won't get there. They just don't have as much because they're young now, right? They might inherit something later on and build their own wealth. So think about these things. And this is not an all-inclusive list, but these are the things that I was thinking about. I was like, you know what? Having at least these 5 things that are solid. And these are things that are not necessarily expensive or hard to implement. So I always recommend work with a financial planner because I always say this, the people that are the best in the world, athletes and so on, they all have coaches, right? Why is that, right? They still work with people who have their best interests and help them become better at what they do. Now, why not you? why not work with a professional or a series of professionals that can help you make sure that you're doing what you're supposed to do in order to reach your goals for tomorrow, and also help your family not have to start from scratch, so that there is something being passed down, even if it's the gift of leaving your kids the ability to start college with zero student loan debt and also have great credit already because you added them to your card, right? So these are small little things that don't really cost a lot necessarily, especially if you have time. The time is on your side, due to the magic of compound interest. So the sooner you start, the better. So I hope you find this useful. As always, feel free to send me an email, luis@onmywaytowealth.com. Stay tuned for the next episode. Thank you for listening to On My Way to Wealth. If you have any questions, please send me an email at luis@onmywaytowealth.com. The information provided here is for information and education purposes only. The opinions expressed herein are solely those of myself, unless otherwise specifically cited. Material presented is believed to be from reliable sources, and no representations are made by my firm or myself about other parties' information or accuracy or completeness. All information or ideas provided should be discussed in detail with a financial advisor, accountant, or legal counsel prior to implementation. Thank you.